Okay, I haven't done a review or talked to a camera in ages. So I decided, after thinking about it for a long time, to discuss something that I think a lot of people don't know about, which is really awesome. And I am, of course, talking about Flash Gordon. This whole idea kind of came up whenever I decided I need to add some more material to my website since it hasn't been updated in about like 3, 4 months. And I've always had a bunch of ideas on stuff to review, but whenever I was talking to somebody the other day and we brought up Flash Gordon, first thing they thought about was the new Flash Gordon that was in 2007, which was utter crap and a complete disservice to the great history of the series. Mind you, I'm not going to say like it was the most fantastic piece of cinema ever made, but it was fun and campy. And I'll basically explain Flash Gordon if you've never heard of it. However, I will admit a lot of the dates, some of the character names and the whatnot, are a bit fuzzy. I'm not like a complete cinephile on like the whole Flash Gordon thing, but I do know a fair amount, just being kind of a casual watcher. From my basic understanding, it originated from an old comic book series done by Alex Raymond that was printed in the 1930s. I should probably first explain some of the history about comic books. Basically, there was this one phase in the medium where people felt like the whole superhero genre was being kind of played out. And people wanted to try something new and exciting with comics. They wanted to tell other types of stories. It would eventually lead into a sudden influx of horror comics and Western comics that pretty much would later on take over. But in between them, there was like this weird sci-fi phase. I used to own a lot of comics in this era, and they started off being very science-heavy, or they would explore a lot of fantastic sci-fi elements and how people would react to them in an entertaining sort of way. Like, what if you bumped into another you, but from Dimension X? Or, like, the implications of time traveling, first contact with aliens, sometimes like a voodoo curse, whatever, you know? But originally there was nothing particularly creepy or disturbing about the imagery. It was like, generally told like Twilight Zone episodes, with a big shocking reveal or exploring what-if scenarios. It was around this period whenever Flash Gordon was released. And Flash Gordon wasn't science fiction, where, like, they kind of explain all the space travel and, technology, and they try to at least give you at least some sort of technobabble. And they usually try to look in depth to, okay, if we had a cloning machine, what are the implications of having and owning a cloning machine? It was more like science fantasy, where you don't question why the fuck the cloning machine works, or how it works, or moral implications of the cloning machine. It's just like, if you had a cloning machine, you just want to dick around with it and have fun and have like a crazy ass adventure, like Nicholas and the 50 Clones. That's science fantasy, you can always have like a kind of a nice mix between the two. Like, I'll give you another example with our cloning machine with the differences. In science fiction, cloning would probably involve getting some cells from the person and then putting them in an egg and then letting the fetus grow in some sort of giant chemical test tube that accelerates growth. The clone would probably not have the same personality as the original, but it'd probably be immature since it hadn't experienced life for itself. And it's basically like a kid in an adult's body. And it might age rapidly as a side effect of accelerated growth. Meanwhile, in science fantasy, our cloning machine is probably the Duplomatic 3000. You just jump in, hit that switch, and after like a puff of smoke or something, a clone of you with all your clothes exists. Just watch out, it secretly might be evil. How does this work, you might ask? A fucking alien space wizard. Okay, here's another example. In science fantasy, magical elements like the Force can exist. The Force is an unseen metaphysical energy that's found in all living things, preordains fate, and binds us all, yada yada. You know the Star Wars drill, you know. Jedi are essentially granted magical powers through the Force. It's something mystical, and it's not really of this world. Masters of the Force consist of druid hermits like Yoda, or archwizards like the Emperor. There are a lot of religious aspects to this Force, like Jedi Knights, and the fact that they always seem to wear monk robes, and the lightsaber is essentially a magic sword. In science fiction, it's midichlorians. So, I mean, Star Trek and the whole sci-fi thing is nice if you want to look in depth to it. Star Wars is if you want to have an adventure in space. Okay, the setting's space, but you don't have to really think too hard on it. Very similar to Flash Gordon in that sense. And I mean, a lot of the things like, there's parts where they're flying around in space, like the vacuum of space, and yet they're breathing perfectly fine. And they're not like alien races, they're just humans doing it. It's just the backdrop space. The technology makes no sense, for example. That's another thing. Some people have blaster rifles and blaster pistols and they're shooting lasers, pew, 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 and they don't explain that either. You don't have to explain it. But other times they're having fencing battles, not with lightsabers or anything really cool and advanced like that. It's just fencing foils. And you're not supposed to question, where do these fencing foils come from? Why are they using fencing foils when they can just use a blaster? You know, why are races that have completely different hands able to use the same tech? Why wouldn't they, like, individualize their tech? No, it's just, it's a story that takes place in space with all these crazy little creatures. That's kind of the setting. So I know a lot of people don't like it just based on that, and that's perfectly legit, but that's part of the fun. That's part of the campiness of it.